It's my nerd world, and welcome to it, a Star Wars podcast. I'm glad you're with the show this week. Unearthed some old interviews, I think going back a couple of years, pre-pandemic, of J.J. Abrams talking about the Rise of Skywalker, and I thought the comments were really interesting. So, I'll be sharing that audio with you coming up. Plus, on another rewatch of The Mandalorian, I was struck with I guess we can call it a revelation. I was struck with a thought about Grogu and the importance that Grogu could have on the future of Star Wars storytelling, especially when we talk about the mythology of Star Wars, that driving force behind the saga films. Thank you so much for checking out the show this week. Let's not waste any more time and get right to My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now you're coming together. Is your undoing.
Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you.
Always.
It's a Star Wars podcast here on My Nerd World, and I'm your host, Jon Justice. Glad you're with the show again this week. I want to start off with kind of where my head has been at the past few weeks. I was thinking about this week's show, and to be quite honest with you, I've been a little bit troubled that the past couple of shows haven't been what I had hoped or what I had desired when I started this podcast. When I started this show, I really wanted to do a podcast that filled a gap that I was missing when I was listening to other Star Wars podcasts, and something a little bit more genuine and authentic. In the past couple of weeks, I just feel like I've missed the mark a bit on that, and it might be because of distractions in the world or in life and the family, the lack of a lot of news going on. But I don't know, I just haven't felt great about the past couple of shows. And if you're listening to this going, oh, John, they've been fine, that's cool. I hope if you continue to enjoy them. But perhaps you've been listening and felt like something was off, and this comment doesn't come as a huge surprise. That's why I really wanted this show and continue to want this show to be a place where I express my fandom in, as I mentioned, the most authentic and genuine of ways. And it is difficult when there's not a lot of news, but I was watching and rewatching The Mandalorian, and I was struck by something, and I want to share with you a thought. And I'm actually kind of excited to do that because it's a bit of speculation, and a bit of speculation around some of the new Star Wars content that doesn't get talked about very often. And it's one of the biggest complaints that I've had after the release of The Rise of Skywalker, that there doesn't appear to be any places where we as fans can go and really get into some hardcore speculation, because we don't really know what is involved with the upcoming projects that haven't been released yet. And The Mandalorian in particular hasn't really, at least it hadn't until this most recent rewatch, hasn't really sparked anything in terms of my imagination about what the future could bring. The Bad Batch is something similar. I really love the show, but it's taken a weird turn as we head towards the last few episodes, where I really thought that Omega was going to be more of a focal point, and while she's still an amazing character, they haven't really done a lot with her to sort of expand upon her background, and maybe we'll get into that in these last couple of episodes. But again, it's tough because we're really critical when it comes to Star Wars, and we're overly analytical when it comes to Star Wars, and I try just to sit back and enjoy it for what it is, and I've continued to do that. But I'm not going to lie, and I have been very honest about the show, on the show about this. You know, I want something to sink my teeth into. And I may have found that when it comes to this rewatch that I've been doing as of late of The Mandalorian. So, before I get to that, let's talk about that which has already come. And more specifically, The Rise of Skywalker. If you are if you're a first-time listener of the show, I love The Rise of Skywalker, and I love The Last Jedi. I love the sequel trilogy. I think they did a fantastic job, and I'm very much of the opinion that in the future, the sequel trilogy will be looked upon with a lot more reverence. Probably that's not the right word. Will be looked back on more fondly than it is now in the controversy that's surrounded both of those films since their release. But I'm fascinated with the creative process, and specifically the creative process around The Rise of Skywalker. I absolutely love the documentary on the Blu-ray for The Rise of Skywalker, also available on the Disney Plus app, and the insight that it gives into the creative process, especially the interviews done with the writers and director Chris Terrio and J.J. Abrams. One of the things I love about The Rise of Skywalker is that it is almost a self-contained movie. I feel like they did a very good job of establishing the stakes of that story to where if you were a first-time viewer of Star Wars, you could put in The Rise of Skywalker, and with just a little bit of background of the world that you are about to visit, you could follow along and enjoy that story for what it is. Now, granted, it wouldn't have the backstory of the relationship between Ben Solo and Rey Skywalker, but at the same time, we didn't really have the backstory of Luke Skywalker when we watched the first A New Hope or Obi-Wan Kenobi or any of those characters. We were just kind of thrown into this galaxy and this story. And one of the things that I love about The Rise of Skywalker is that it is very much in the same vein. It is a singular story that is an adventure tale involving MacGuffins with high stakes for our characters and the galaxy in and of itself, while also being a fantastic, again, in my opinion, conclusion to the Star Wars saga of films. So, again, I'm increasingly and always interested to hear insight into the movie-making process. And I stumbled across this interview back from 2019. This is Perry Nemiroff, formerly of Collider. I don't think she's with Collider anymore. Sitting down with director J.J. Abrams. And I want to share the audio with you, and then I'll comment on it when it's over.
So between Rise of Skywalker and Force Awakens, I'm wondering which character changed the most after you cast the role?
Well, I'll say it wasn't so much that any one character changed more than another, but I know that on Force Awakens, the energy that between Rey and Finn, for example, was a different thing at the beginning. You know, we'd written a little bit more of a kind of contentious kind of relationship, and as we were shooting scenes, I was just feeling like it wasn't popping, it wasn't really working, and then I'd say cut. And then Daisy and John would be like, they would just be like the greatest of friends and have this amazing sort of, repartee, and I was like, what the hell is like every time I'd say cut, it was so much better than when I was saying action. And so we literally went back and rewrote their dynamic, not so much their characters, but just sort of who they were to each other, so that it was a bit more, in line with and in sync with kind of who we actually had and what was clearly naturally the energy that was between them.
That energy radiates off screen. So I'm
Yeah,
glad
they're
you went
amazing.
that route.
And by the way, sorry, John and Oscar from the beginning were immediately, like, weirdly, wonderfully on fire. Like that was great
I
from the
believe
get-go.
it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering one thing about a particular story beat. Why was it important to you to reassemble Kylo's helmet? And when you're crafting a beat like that, is there any concern about undoing the decision he makes in Last Jedi?
No, because I think that part of it is about his commitment to the dark side. He, as you'll see, is becoming supreme leader, and without giving anything away, his sort of focus has been a little bit, more on practical matters. He's assumed, that position within the First Order. And so this is a bit, it represents his sort of recommitting to the dark side, to the Knights of Ren, and then, because of a very specific thing that he's about to go do. So it as you see in the story, there's a reason for it, which it might not be clear, obviously, at this moment to the audience.
I'm into the tease, though.
That's a great question.
You're probably not going to be able to give me any specifics on this, but I'm wondering, just from an emotional perspective, what was it like for you crafting the final shot of this film, the end of this trilogy, the end of the Skywalker saga, and did you always know what you wanted it to be, or was there any workshopping with it?
We knew, weirdly on this movie, we knew fairly early on. It took a bit to get there, but once we got there, we knew fairly early on how the movie ended. And that was something that was, we all felt like if we do our job and if it works, could be a very moving, final piece. Strangely, in this movie, the first act was the one that was the most challenging. I mean, it was all challenging, but the first act, strangely, was a bit of a puzzle, whereas normally in a film, I have found the first act comes pretty early and sort of stays what it is. That was not the case here.
Boy, that final comment certainly rings true, right? I think that was one of the first complaints that I heard from viewers upon a first watching of The Rise of Skywalker, was how jarring that opening series of scenes was. That being said, while I felt the same way upon a first viewing, it didn't bother me, but it was, it was like, wow, we are really ripping through these opening scenes. Upon dozens of watches since that opening night, I really love the beginning of this film. I like how it's paced, and how you go through a series of really fun, interesting scenes, and before you know it, our group of heroes are together, and they're going off on this amazing adventure. People act as if J.J. Abrams, Chris Terrio, and Rian Johnson don't really care about Star Wars, right? You hear this comment quite a lot, and I couldn't disagree with that more. They all went into this to create a story that they felt was genuine and authentic to them. And I've mentioned this before on the show, but I had a talent coach early in my career, working in radio, who had taught me be as genuine and as authentic as you can be, and you'll reach the largest audience you're capable of reaching. Don't just, for the world that I live in doing talk radio, don't just cover what you feel like people want to hear about. Cover the things that you care about, because that's going to be the most interesting and compelling content. Nobody's going to want to hear you talk about things that you don't really have any interest in. And this goes back to the beginning of the show this week, where I felt I wasn't really happy with the past couple of episodes because of the Star Wars podcast, just because I feel like I'd been going through the motions and trying to treat it a little bit more And actually, it was a little bit more mundane than I wanted it to be, and I wanted to bring that genuine love and always have of Star Wars to the forefront, and it felt like it's been lacking the past few weeks. But when I watched The Last Jedi, getting back to the point, when I watched The Last Jedi, The Force Awakens, and Force Awakens to a lesser extent, and I'll get back to that in a moment, even though I really love that film. When I get into The Last Jedi and you look at the writing of that film and the Rise of Skywalker, it seems pretty clear to me that both Rian Johnson, Chris Terrio, and J.J. Abrams genuinely wanted to deliver a story and did deliver a story that was most exciting for them, and they found out how large of an audience they were capable of reaching, and the box office returns certainly show that. Now, of course, you have that different dynamic that the sequel trilogy didn't have, that the prequel trilogy didn't have, of social networking and the ability of individuals to send out their thoughts on a whim, even anonymously, that people latch onto, and it creates a lot of controversy. And I don't think Star Wars will ever be without controversy as long as social networking exists. I do feel that these three films would be treated a lot differently if we didn't have social networking and we were just talking among our friends. Because it used to be, when I was growing up, you'd go see a movie and you'd walk out and you'd talk with your friends about what you liked about it and what you didn't like about it, and you'd move on. Or you would discuss the matter between friends in a friendly way. Now we have these discussions out in the open, which invites dissenting opinions, which reinforces the negativity too often and doesn't bolster the positivity of it. I love hearing those interviews with J.J. Abrams because and Rian Johnson, because when they're asked about these films, it really does seem like, to me, and it really does show in the words that they say and how they speak about the creative process, how much they did love and enjoy making these movies. And it adds to my enjoyment of these films that I love so much. So if you want to comment, as always, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. Now let's get into something else that dawned on me on a recent rewatch of The Mandalorian.
This is not going to go the way you think.
This idea of mythology has really been playing on my mind lately. Inspired by my excitement over the release of Dune here in a couple of months, and the most recent trailer, comments that people have made who have seen the first 10 minutes of the film, that this is a cross between Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, and people making comments like, this Dune film is what Star Wars is supposed to be. It's like, no, Star Wars is what Star Wars is supposed to be. Star Wars, and George Lucas more specifically, was influenced very much by Frank Herbert's novel. There's no doubt about that at all. So I'm fascinated to get into this world of Dune and this mythology, because that's what I love. I love the legacy angle of it, and the idea of the Force, or the idea of belief in any of these types of fantasy films. The fantasy element of Star Wars. And that's something that I've actually sort of come around on as a fan over the course of the past few years. I love the vehicles, and I've talked about that a lot. I think lightsabers are the coolest weapon ever to grace a screen, right? Especially when it comes to sci-fi. I mean, how do you ever top a laser sword, for crying out loud? They're awesome. But I really do love the fantasy element of Star Wars and the mythology of Star Wars and the Force, right? And I grew up and was raised on that. So I've been rewatching The Mandalorian, and I'm going to put out my PSA, since I have the opportunity, of, depending on what your home viewing habits are, I would suggest, again, taking your phone, your laptop, whatever distraction you have when you sit down to watch Star Wars content, right, or anything you want to get into, put those aside and just watch it. Because when you get distracted, for me personally, when I get distracted by my phone, I don't end up enjoying what I'm watching nearly as much if I were just sitting there acting like I was locked in, as if I was in a darkened movie theater. So I'm watching The Mandalorian Season 2. I'm really watching The Mandalorian Season 2. And again, one of those moments watching this show where, for some reason, I just started getting a new appreciation for it. And I think it's partly because, for the first time in a long time, I had done what I just said. I took my phone and I placed it off to the side. I didn't have it next to me, and I was just watching every frame of this show. And so I'm watching it, and we're moving through the episodes of Season 2. I realize how much I enjoy the back half of Season 1 and Season 2 more than the first part of Season 1, even though I enjoy both seasons, and every episode has their plus and minuses. But then something struck me about Grogu. Now, I don't know if Disney or Lucasfilm is planning on doing anything with this, but something dawned on me in thinking about, again, Dune coming out and mythology. I'm wrapping up for now, the final book in my EMBARK science fiction space opera series, Book 7. Book 6 is off with the editor right now, and I've started writing Book 7. And after Book 7 is done, I have an idea and a lot of notes already done and an outline for an epic sci-fi fantasy story. Very much about the idea of mythology and building my own mythology, right, within this. So thinking along those lines and watching The Mandalorian through that lens, something struck me about Grogu, and that Grogu is, or could potentially be, our new Luke Skywalker. But the question I have is, will Disney take advantage of this? So we have this really unique storytelling taking place, of taking what had come before, of your spaghetti westerns, your Kurosawa films, Lone Wolf and Cub, all of these things that inspired George Lucas. Jon Favreau with The Mandalorian saying he was less inspired by Star Wars and more inspired by that which inspired George Lucas. Okay. And in this story of this bounty hunter with a heart, with a moral conscience, which is really interesting in my view too, because the Mandalorian is really kind of a good guy, and he's not your typical sort of anti-hero. And they kind of dispense with that idea early on in that first season. But here you have this character of Grogu, who we find out through Ahsoka during that second season episode that he was being trained and was rescued by somebody during Order 66. And now the Mandalorian is tasked with bringing him to the Jedi so that he can continue his journey. And I began to see some parallels with Luke Skywalker. Now, granted, it is different in a lot of respects, right? Grogu wasn't found somewhere and then introduced to the Force necessarily. It seems as if, so far, based off of what we know, that Grogu was taken at a very early age, found to be Force sensitive like they did during the time of the prequels, and brought in at a very early age to begin his Jedi training. And that needed to continue. But first, after Order 66, and he ends up in the custody of the Mandalorian, we have a story to tell of who actually rescued Grogu during Order 66, and where was he, and how did he end up in the circumstances that he ended up in that first episode when the Mandalorian finds him holed up in that building. During episode 1, but beyond that, what happens with Grogu moving forward? And this is where I wanted to go, because I'm sure we're going to get that backstory on Grogu at some point in time, down the line. We're going to find we will. There's no way on God's green earth that Disney will not fill in the backstory of what happened between Order 66 and when the Mandalorian found Grogu. But now, what's happened? Well, Grogu has essentially ended up in the hands of Luke Skywalker, who, in a way, represents Yoda. In the same way that Luke Skywalker ended up being brought by Obi-Wan Kenobi to go and find Yoda on Dagobah. Now, again, we don't know the background of Grogu, what happened to his family. We do know that Grogu is with Luke Skywalker now, and he's being trained. So what happens with Grogu after this? We know that this species can live for a really long time. We know that this species is capable of intelligent thought and can speak based off of Yoda. So eventually, one has to imagine that we will get a talking Grogu. I wonder whether or not Grogu is the key moving forward when it comes to the mythology of Star Wars, where after the events of the Rise of Skywalker, Grogu makes an appearance as an older, now still relatively young based off of his species, well-trained Jedi. And what will that mean for the galaxy? What does that mean for Rey being trained, right, by Leia and having gone through her own trials, but seemingly giving up the Jedi path for now at the end of the Rise of Skywalker? And is there not a story to be told wherein Grogu now suddenly becomes our new Luke Skywalker in a storyline that will take place after the Rise of Skywalker? I can't help but feel that that's the setup, right? And maybe I am way late to the party on this, but again, it didn't dawn on me until this most recent watching. I'm like, man, I'm suddenly now really interested in Grogu. And I'm really interested in Grogu because of what happened to Luke Skywalker and the potential that we have of this young, inexperienced, somewhat trained in the Jedi ways, Force-sensitive figure that everybody loves, that has a lifespan that can go on for a long, long time, right? He was only 50 at this point in time. I mean, think about how old Yoda was by the time he passed away. So I wonder if Disney, and this is what I want to ask you, where do you think Disney is at with Grogu right now? Did they expect him to be as big of a hit as he is? Was the idea that, you know, we're going to wrap up this season 2 of The Mandalorian, give him to Luke, and we'll just see what happens later on? Or, as is talked about so much in Star Wars fandom, is there a plan? And that plan will heavily involve Grogu down the line. He's going to become a much bigger figure in storytelling. And I can't help but think that there is a golden opportunity to bring in that mythology and have an adventure with Grogu as we reestablish how the galaxy now is in a post the Rise of Skywalker, end of the Sith Eternal, and from all that we know, the end of the First Order world. I think a part of this is going to get answered if we ever and when we ever find out what time frame Rogue Squadron lands in. But there's a gold mine sitting here, and it's not necessarily a gold mine of dollars, even though it's that too. It's a gold mine of storytelling, and it's a gold mine of mythology, and something new and different where we could potentially have a movie centered around an alien protagonist. Think about how cool it would be based off of what we know about Yoda and his personality, of what a teenage, relatively speaking, Grogu would be like. How does the training of Luke Skywalker affect him in his adolescence as he begins to grow? What kind of attitude does he end up having? And what does that mean for future storytelling with what Disney and Lucasfilm can do with it? It has me excited in a way that I wasn't prior to this most recent rewatch of The Mandalorian. Because I love Grogu like everybody else. I thought he was awesome. And the way that they handled that character, they made him so compelling that you just don't want to take, for me, I don't want to take my eyes off of the screen when he is there, and he seems so carefree and lighthearted, and yet he has this immense amount of power. We have this amazing character that they've created and that they've done again, right? Yoda could have gone the way of Jar Jar within the fandom, and it didn't. It totally worked, and has become one of the most beloved characters ever. And now we have this opportunity in Grogu. And we know that they were planning on Yoda films a while back that they kind of ditched after the frustrations around the box office concerning Solo. What do you think? What do you think the future of Grogu is, and where would you like to see that story go? Do you want to see the training of Grogu with Luke Skywalker? We're hearing some rumors that could be taking place in the Book of Boba Fett. We do know that an individual on YouTube who used deepfake technology to try and improve the appearance of a digitally recreated Luke Skywalker in the final episode of The Mandalorian has been hired by Lucasfilm and Disney to do just that because he did a better job than they did of creating a digital Luke. So does this mean, potentially, does this point to confirming some of those rumors about Grogu being trained by Luke in the Book of Boba Fett? And what does that mean down the road? What happened to Grogu during the time of the events of the sequel trilogy? Those are questions that I want answered. And I think that there is some fantastic storytelling to be mined based off the popularity of Grogu and a chance to do something very different by having that particular character being an alien and having him be a protagonist and following him on his journey. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. You can also leave a comment up on YouTube. I love reading your comments when you write in, and we'll share them with you again on next week's show. As always, I want to remind you, if you want to support My Nerd World and a Star Wars podcast, you can do so if you're a reader of science fiction, not just a movie watcher, by going up and picking up your preferred copy, either of ebook, paperback, or audiobook of my EMBARK space opera series, which is available on Amazon.com under Jon Justice. Book 1 is available right now. EMBARK Book 1 is available in ebook for just 99 cents. And purchase of the ebook, of any of the ebooks, gets you a massive discount on the audiobook produced by yours truly. As I mentioned, the 6th book in the series, Fear the Dangerous Night, should be out sometime in August. It's with the editor right now, and I've already started writing book 7. You can also go to mynerdworld.net to find out anything else you want to know about My Nerd World and the shows that I do and the podcasts and the books. It's all available there at the website at mynerdworld.net. I hope you enjoyed the show this week. Looking forward to hearing from you between now and next weekend. I hope wherever you are that you are happy, that you are safe, and may the Force be with you. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.